Indeed, I am still not done talking about antagonists and stories that I would like to create and characters that I would like to be able to properly and fully flesh out. Last time I talked about female characters and antagonists in both fantasy and sci fi settings, and my own capabilities of creating stories and settings, specifically speaking sci fi, and well, the lack of my ability to actually create a good sci fi story. And this time I wanted to continue with a few more thoughts that I thought were worth putting into words, or at least attempting to do so in an cohesive, understandable, and comprehensive way. So I'll try my best to do so. And meanwhile, I'll also try to do my very best to stick to my rules because I'm well aware that these talks could very easily devolve into a spiral of negativity and things that I just dislike about storytelling and stories in general, and I would like to avoid that, so I'm going to at least word my sentences in a way that's positive, focusing on what I want in my stories rather than what I dislike and don't want, and hopefully it will work out somehow. Now, what I wanted to begin with was that I feel that if the female character in the story is either unable or not allowed to be just purely evil, the same way many male characters in many stories are, it to an extent invalidates whatever good that character does. If the setting never taught me that said female character can be evil, unfortunately, I'm just going to assume, and most of the time correctly, that she just won't be evil, purely evil. This is definitely something that I've begun noticing in the past few years, and now even retrospectively to some degree. It is especially prominent in Korean and Japanese media, and is definitely something that I really want to avoid in my wannabe attempts at storytelling. And then there is the unfortunate reality of those exceptions that I mentioned. I know they exist, I'm well aware of them, but their already rather small pool is further diluted by the misunderstood villain trope and anti-hero trope, which would be fine if we are talking about male villains, because there is the undeniable huge portion of male antagonists that are just there to get slaughtered and are just purely evil, but unfortunately, in terms of their female counterparts in the same position, that's extremely rare and something that I would like to craft well in my own stories. Because if the already extremely rare species called female villain suffers even further attempts at extermination, then it's hard for me to feel the proper emotions that I should feel when the protagonist or side characters are facing an actual evil character. In their case, the only thing I feel is that she either has a good reason to commit whatever thing she did for the greater good, or that she is controlled by the true male evil villain and thus she is supposedly innocent. I want to be able to create both male and female villains with proper stories, but their actions should never arouse just purely feelings of sympathy. I think that would somehow diminish their existence, their value as a character that should serve as an antithesis of the protagonist. I, as a reader, I want to be mainly angry at the villain that I, as the writer, create, even though I do want to be able to understand their actions. I want to know their story, but I don't want that background to intervene in my negative feelings that I want to cultivate against that character, both by me as the reader and by the world around them. I want the story to acknowledge that whatever they did and whatever they are doing is actually evil, not some weird, twisted, this sort of gray zone that I feel that many stories are resorting to. I think that there is a obvious place for something like that. Characters that are morally ambiguous, but at the end of the day, I do want my villains to be villains. I want them to have the freedom to actually commit the things that are considered evil in that setting, instead of just vaguely meandering around them. I think that I'm doing at least a decent job at staying within my boundaries, and I'm just showing some examples to further prove what I'm aware of and what I would like to strive towards in terms of storytelling and crafting an actual different universe that does not suffer from the same constraints ours does and offers the opportunities to everyone equally, but also simultaneously enforces the exact same kind of punishments and consequences of the actions of the characters within the rules and abilities of said characters. I have some framework, I think, done in terms of these characters and what I would like to achieve. So we'll see if that works out in the end and if the story that I'll create ends up actually making me happy, which is what I want to do with it and the only reason why I'm actually even writing. Now I am done with Asterix, and what I wanted to talk about next is the only other comic that I'll be talking about. I have never really interacted with comic books in my childhood past Asterix, and this one I'm going to talk about in the next few videos. Comic books never really were that big in my country, and I never really felt the need to actually engage with them. Unfortunately, I fell for manga for a few years, considering the fact that I'm only ever going to talk about one manga and anime. I would say it's rather easily understandable what my stance on them is now, but when I was young, I had these few comic books. One of them was this sort of a assortion of sci-fi comics from various authors. I genuinely failed to remember any of them without actually opening the book and reading them again. Then there were these Asterix books, and wait, now when I'm actually thinking about it, there is one more that I'll absolutely will talk about, and that's Garfield. At some point, I'll definitely mention it because at least the volumes that I've had during my childhood were just pure joy, and I'm very happy that now that I've actually even remembered it because it's been a while since I last read a Garfield comic, and I'm definitely going to enjoy going back to those. Seems like I still am discovering some things that I'm willing to talk about that are just bringing pure joy to me. Back to the comic books, it was Asterix, Garfield, the collection of those sci-fi comics is, and then there was one prehistoric comic called Rahan, which was about this young man who was rather curious and trying to understand phenomena which people of that age, mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, shamanism, and so on, just were unable to understand. I might briefly go over those because I do remember them quite well, and I read that one book, comic book, quite often when I was a child, but it never really left as much of an impression on me as the one that I'm actually now going to talk about, which is Jaroslav Foglar's Rapid Arrows. At first, a comic book with a very long history considering when it started coming out. It was during the Second World War, which was rather rough on my country, and it lasted all the way till the end of the SSSR, which we were part of. It is a comic book featuring five boys, a club called Rapid Arrows, led by their leader, Mirek Dushin, who was intentionally portrayed as this Gary Stew, would be now the term used, but back then Foglar's intentions were to provide boys with some sort of a role model, a boy that's always kind to others, helpful, yet athletic, outspoken about issues that are plaguing the society of that era in a non preachy, not annoying way. He is not afraid to take action when something that's completely against his moral compass is happening, and somehow Fogler managed to achieve just that, create this young man who the reader doesn't have to feel bad about looking up to because his actions do not contradict his words and he is always the same. He is accompanied by four other boys, Jarka Metelka, Indra Hoyer, Redcap, Červenáček in my language, and Speedy Rychlonožka, and they are also accompanied by a dog called Bublina, Bubble, for a portion of their adventures. And all in all, even though the books do explore some rather disturbing themes, these young men always stick to their morals, they stick to each other, and they stick for others that seemingly are in bad situations on multiple occasions, and thus they created this morally uplifting collection of stories that I am actually happy to go back to and fondly remember and talk about them. So that's what I'm going to be doing in the next few videos. I have no idea how long it's going to take. I'm guessing 10, maybe 12. It's shorter, there are less stories compared to Asterix, so we'll see how that goes. But that's it for today.